Thanks everybody for coming. My name's Janet Hoskin. You've probably heard me already. I'm a university lecturer in special education and inclusive education at University of East London, and I work with Nick in Decipher as well. Nick runs Decipher, and we'll talk about that with you a bit longer. Also, we've got someone with DMD. So today we're going to very briefly, because you've heard quite a lot about this from me and from Chloe and from Rory about the risks in DMD. So we'll talk very briefly about that. I won't go into it in too much depth. Then we will be focusing really on what works. We want to be a bit solution focused today and think what is helpful, what can we share. So what we want to do is hear from you as well. So we're hopefully going to leave enough time at the end, if we can stop rabbiting, to actually hear from you and to share ideas and things like that. And we're also going to, in the time, so we're only going to talk for 20 minutes, so we're hopefully going to tell you very briefly 10 things we think can be helpful for school and home to support like learning and behaviour issues, really. Am I doing this? I'm doing this one, am I? Or are you doing it? Oh, sorry, we have agreed and now I've totally forgotten. Right, okay, yeah, so as you know from the last few days, we've heard quite a bit about different risks. So again, it can be neurobiological risks such as ADHD, autistic spectrum condition, working memory, all these things where the brain is affected can have an impact on education and learning, but also there can be pressures from society, pressures about friendships, all these sorts of things can also have an impact, and we heard about the biopsychosocial model yesterday. So I'm not going to go into too much depth about that. What parents often tell us is the most difficult things are to do with behaviour, particularly things like anxiety that can cause quite stubborn, what appears to be stubborn behaviour, quite fixed, quite rigid behaviour. And some of the young people that we have worked with have quite a lot of sensory issues. They might be oversensitive to sound or touch, or they might our controller at home for the TV used to be permanently chewed because Saul was always chewing it, which is a bit grim, but anyway. Also, language processing can mean that because you're not getting your words out, you can be, take it out, use behaviour more, be a bit more physical, particularly when you're little. That often happens. Inflexibility. So if the timetable changes, if assembly isn't happening today, or if there's something going on in the hall and it isn't happening as they expect, that can cause lots of things like meltdowns. And getting fixed on certain behavioural concepts is something that often happens. We see this quite a lot with things like computer gaming, getting fixated on different kind of hobbies and things like that. So again, it's being aware of these things and realising that it isn't necessarily the young person trying to be difficult, but that it's linked with, what their difficulties are, really. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nick Catlin. I'm doing a project I have been doing for 2 or 3 years, few years now, with Duchenne UK, and it's to support families and young people, in particular in schools. And I do a lot of work. I've been doing a lot of work lately with, helping to get through education, health and care plans, and all that sort of stuff. So do come and see me afterwards. It's free. You don't have to pay, right? And I can help you navigate through the system. Okay. So, but there is this. Rory put this the graph up there, which I love it. It's because as Janet described, that there are these difficulties, but they tend to be kind of spiky. So in some areas that they have quite a lot of problems. In other areas they have a lot of strengths. So on the positive side, as Janet's mentioned, the boys do, young people do have special interests. They can also, Veronica Hinton described them sometimes as being like little professors. Like they seem to, although they can't kind of process what they're thinking or what they want to say. You just know that they have that they've got the words, they've got the vocabulary, they've got the general knowledge, but they can't seem to process it, or they can't process it in a conversation in normal kind of time. They seem to get stuck, and then they sometimes that creates a lot of anxiety and they explode. But quite often they will retreat, and quite often we see them retreating a lot at school where they mask these things. And who gets it? Yeah, we do, when they come out the school gate and come home, and it all kinds of erupts. But it's important to keep understanding ourselves as parents, but also as education professionals. It's important that we know that the general knowledge and vocabulary is there, because if you know that, then and we'll talk about some top tips here about how you can begin to fish that out and help them to fish that out. So they can get hyper focused. So once they've decided on an interest, or they want to do something, they won't give up. They've got good long-term memory. I mentioned that. So we're going to look at these 10 things that Nick and Janet's top tips. Early intervention, really, really important. Don't wait until you're. It's okay to start in nursery. Start the self-assessment for an education, health and care plan as early as you possibly can. Write a personal statement. I can help you with that. I've got some resources for that, and I can send them to you, because your views are really, really important. You know your son better than most of the professionals in school will ever know him, and so it's important that you. But when you're writing your personal statement, the thing that you get from the local authority for their education, health and care plan, it'll be kind of generic. What you need to do is to write one with through the lens of Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, and that we've got some resources that can help you to do that. You also you need when you're going through getting an education, health and care plan, you need all the assessments that you can get your hands on, because whether you get an education, health and care plan or not is going to depend on evidence. So it's partly what you and the school are going to provide, but you must get your neuromuscular consultant to send you letters, cognitive assessment, speech therapy, where all these things are appropriate. Don't rely on your SENCO to send it to the local authority. Make sure you collect it yourself and make sure it's all included. The last thing to say about this, why is that important? Because right from the beginning, you remember the spiky profile? You're beginning to get opinions about what that spiky profile looks like. And I can tell you, amongst all of you here, your sons will be different from my sons and everyone else's. So it's important that you get as fine a grain assessment as you possibly can get, very early on. Briefly on reading and literacy, this is an area of, I would say, definite high risks in Duchenne. It starts with early phonics. So the boys, when they're young, they'll get k, and they'll get a, and they'll get t, but they can't get k, a, t. They can't process that together to make cat, and they get in a fuddle, a muddle, and they hate it and get angry about it, and so on. What we found, and Janet has done a lot of work on this, is that with I can't say it now, synthetic phonics programs, the good ones, we recommend Read Write Inc., the Ruth Miskin books and series, and I usually use it with slightly older guys, but there's a very good online program called IDL Literacy, and if you want to try it, I can get you some logins again, funded through our program, that can be useful. The take-home lesson, though, is as well as the reading stuff that they're going to do at school, and they should be included in those sessions, almost certainly they're going to need 20 minutes a day extra intervention on something like Read, Write, Inc. or IDL. And if you do that at home and school, and you you'll have good days and bad days. I know you will. Some days it doesn't work, so just move on. But every day, 20 minutes, it really, really does work. It changes things. Paired reading, really, really important, because not only phonics, but also, we learn to read by sight as well. So, when it becomes reading becomes automatic, you're just looking at the shape of the word and you're reading it. You don't break down every single word when you're reading it. So, getting paired reading, what I mean is that you have a finger, the cat sat on the mat, and you get the young person to read those words back to you. You can read all, very complex stories like that, and it's important that you develop that sight reading alongside the phonics stuff. Audio books, fantastic. There's some wonderful audio stuff out there. Our son used to go to sleep listening to Harry Potter. I think he still does, probably. Making sure that inclusion's working. This is I have to say, in the current climate, inclusion is really, coming up against it. More young people are either being with special educational needs are being excluded from school, and being pushed into special schools. We don't think that young people with Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy should be in special schools. We think that they should be included in mainstream education. So here's a few top tips. Before you start, choose your schools carefully. Go into school and get a feel, a notion, ask questions about, with the Senko and the head teacher about, not just what their policies are in inclusion. What does it really mean? So do they really support friendships? What sort of lunchtime activities do they do? Are there things that might be around the interests of the young people? Our guys a lot of them are into Doctor Who, Lego, all that sort of stuff. What are they going to provide for our young people to make friendships, develop friendships, and so on? There is an intervention that we're beginning to look at quite carefully called Circle of Friends. Have they tried any specific interventions when things start to go wrong with our boys and peer groups? So there's some other activities of interest. So check out on inclusion in school. Is it working? Not just policies, but practically, what do they do? Janet's going to talk to you all about Ross Green, I think.
Thank you. Okay, I've got to do the next 7 in 5 minutes. So if you've ever heard James Poisky speak, he was the person who is in charge of the psychosocial guidelines for 2018. He talks a lot about using Ross Green's ideas of changing your lens. And Ross Green is a psychologist in America. He's written books like Lost at School, The Explosive Child, and all his work says he's not interested in what diagnosis a child has. It's just looking at his behaviour. And he does a lot of work with rigid and people who are very inflexible. Anyway, Ross Green says that what's really important is that we start to change our lens about working with young people or parenting young people who have these inflexible behaviours. And rather than saying, he won't do it, it's that he can't do it. And actually he needs help to learn those kind of often executive function skills that Chloe was talking about this morning, being able to problem solve, being able to become a bit more flexible. So I would recommend Ross Green if you're struggling with those issues. Seeing the positives and having a growth mindset. I don't know if you've come across this idea of growth mindset, but our kids might not learn things in the same way as other children. They might not be on the same kind of speed trajectory. I was saying to somebody earlier that Saul was learning to speak English when other kids in the class at 6 were learning French, Okay, but actually they'll get there. Most children with intervention and support and, supportive families, they'll get there. They'll get to their point where they want to be. But praising their effort, praising them that they're trying, being positive, I think we really underestimate that impact. The more that we can say, wow, well done. And if you are doing phonics at home or stuff at home, finish on a high. Don't end it with everybody throwing pencils at each other or whatever, because, take it from me, it really doesn't work. It's much better to just really go for the praise, and it does make a big difference, doesn't it? Number 6, so many of our boys, as we've said, have got these special interests. I mean, there's a lot of research in autism that talks about kids with special interests, and quite often autistic kids have these special interests that can be completely not age appropriate. So I've got a picture up there of a plumbing system. So, some kids get obsessed with how a campsite's plumbed or something if you're on holiday, or, the French Revolution or something that you wouldn't expect a sort of 7-year-old to be really interested in. However, a lot of our boys also have lots of age appropriate, and, it might be that their interests are age appropriate, but find out what they're interested in and don't be scared to support them and help them to learn through that. There's research in autism that does show that inclusion is improved if we start with what the child's interested in. What are they? If they're interested in superheroes, can we do counting superheroes or colours or whatever it is that they're learning, rather than making it something that they struggle with. Okay, this is you, yeah.
I'm in trouble if I don't get through this quick. Okay, sensory issues, yeah. Sight, sound, taste, touch, and so on. My personal experience of working with the young boys with Duchenne and their families, parents report this. We don't have a great deal of data on this, but I think this is a really big issue, and believe me, it can have a quite a profound effect on our boys with Duchenne. So it's about thinking and getting school to think about home, but get school to think about decompressing, about sensory load. Is the school hall too smelly, too noisy, too whatever? Because it can have a really the young person can be going, well, I'm not going in there, and just refuse to. I know a mum told me a story about her boy who was desperate to go and see a film and dressed up and everything, and he got to the cinema and he just couldn't go into the actual cinema. He just froze completely. So beware of these sensory overloads, and school and in their education, health and care plan, they quite often, our boys need sensory breaks. So they need breaks during the day where they can go for a walk in the playground. I know that's difficult because it breaks down all the school rules and everything, but sometimes they need it. That's why quite often we need one-to-one TAs, so the boys can say, look, I just can't cope with this anymore, the overload in the classroom for all sorts of reasons, and they can get out. You can actually meet with certain OTs who will talk about sensory diet. What this is, they can have squidgy balls, and sometimes in primary schools I've been in, they have lovely little boxes of stuff that they can have a 10-minute kind of fiddle around with. And that really, honestly, it sounds a bit trite, but it's for them, it's a real kind of, it's a real game changer. Avoiding anxiety. Another parent I spoke to, I said, tell me on a scale of 0 to 10, how, about your son's level of anxiety. She stood back and looked at me and said, Nick, with him, we're talking about a scale of 8 to 10. He's always got high levels of anxiety. And I think this is, there are brain reasons. I won't go into that, but there are brain reasons for that. So what can you do about it? Preparing. Keeping the levels of anxiety down as much as you possibly can. Let out the pressure a little bit. Plan. So if you're going to the supermarket and you know it's going to be a potential meltdown situation, then plan for it. Talk to him about what's going to look like. Get the school to use visual timetables. Use the if-then approach. If you do this page of your reading, then, no, I shouldn't say this. He's going to have a pizza or ice. There's no nutritionists in here, are there? No. So, if then is because it begins to prepare. Okay, I'll do that because I know that that's going to come next. Embracing interests, as Janet's talking about. Self-soothing is very, very important to, particularly to some of our boys. That comes out in all kinds of ways. Some autistic people, do things automatically with their hands and spin things and so on. With our boys, it tends to be like 2 hours on the computer. But for them, that's a they're getting out, they're desensitizing, they're getting out of everything that's going on around them, and it's helping them to self-regulate. Be positive. I can't tell you how fantastic it is for them if you just say to them, I'm just so proud of what you've done. Because a lot of their experiences are quite negative, and they just love to hear it from parents and grandparents and people. Very, very quickly about empathy. I think this is the hardest thing I think to do. So double empathy means, beginning to understand the emotions or where the young person's coming from. That's what I mean by empathy. By us understanding, their feelings and their point of view. If you go head on with them, put your coat on. Put your coat on now. Get that coat on. You're heading into raising that anxiety. You're raising the stakes. Sometimes you have to. But if you can begin to use declarative language, statements, I wonder what the weather's like. I think it's raining, Dad. Okay. You get the idea. That they begin to, because one of the things they find difficult is seeing the big picture. They don't notice, they're too involved in what it is they're doing. They don't notice that it's raining. You do, and you're predicting that they're going to need their coat. So using declarative statements, I notice, or maybe I wonder, is a way of going round the back. And the other important, and avoiding the meltdowns, but the most important thing is it's getting them to use their words. I talked earlier on about their language and about their vocabulary and so on. It's getting them to use that as often as you possibly can. But on the other side of that, they've got to, the other side of the empathy, they've got to understand about our feelings and about how we're, if you like, being in the real world. So, share how you feel sometimes. I get upset when you hurt other people because it's a mean thing to do. It's okay to say that and discuss that with them because they've got to understand us.
Okay, and finally, our 10th top tip is having high aspirations for the future. So, you know, our boys quite often don't get asked what they want to do when they grow up. It's like silent, it's the elephant in the room. You ask all the siblings, but the young person in the wheelchair doesn't get those questions. So it's really important. We heard yesterday from Benjamin and Saul, and there's plenty of other examples of people out here. John's here at the back, you know, holding down, I mean, John's on a PhD, you know, worked in all sorts of different jobs. So, you know, we've got to say to schools, you know, we're expecting our young people to go off and have lives and do things, have relationships, and have, you know, have careers. So thank you. Thanks ever so much. And do get in contact with Nick at Decipher if you want to talk about anything to do with support at school.